Hello, my lovelies. My name's Dolthalion, and the plan for today is to finally show you the process for making Aziraphale's trunk hose. My inspiration for this was the wonderful TV version of Good Omens that Neil Gaiman show ran for the BBC and for Amazon, and my main pattern is from the Tudor tailor. You can see my mock-up process and how I made the hose and the shirt for this in the playlist, which I have linked for you up here. There's also the video that came out 2 weeks ago that details the process of preparing the trunk hose and all of the structure that went into them. So if you haven't seen that already, I highly recommend you check that out. That's also linked for you. The plan for this was to stay as historically accurate as possible, which is what led me to doing 700 hours plus of hand sewing. But I know you've all been waiting for a while, so without further ado, let's get to the video. The last video detailed my months-long slog through preparing the panes and applying the trim, all of the padding and the darts for the foundation linings, and then finally some gathering threads so that I could gather all of the pieces to fit together. With all of the preparation work done, I was finally ready to start main construction. The bottom of the panes I gathered to match the bottom of the foundation linings, over the top of all of those darts, and then pinned and basted into place. Knowing how tough sewing this seam was going to be, I used a matching thread and sewed each gather with the intention of leaving those stitches in to make sure that the gathers wouldn't go anywhere. Then the linings with the panes are lined up with the top of the canyons and basted down as well. Before I got to battle through sewing through all of those many layers. This is where I started to lose needles, as well as a few of them going through the 2 layers of leather on my thimble. But by going slow, taking my time and being patient, I eventually won. Once that's done on both legs, the excess was trimmed off the panes to try and get it to lie down as flat as possible. This is when the wadding sausages I made right at the beginning went in, stitched to the top of all of those darts. The top of the foundations is flipped up over the sausage and the back of the darts and then pinned into place over the crotch seams. Then the waist of the trunk hose linings, without the panes, was gathered up to the waist of the foundation and basted into place. I sewed down the waist at this stage to make sure that all of the gathers were properly stitched into place, but the waistband will go on top of this seam, so it's not technically necessary, and I wouldn't have done it if I was machine sewing. At this point, the pattern tells you to join the waistband and attach it before the legs are joined. Rather than doing the waistband separately, I decided to join the legs up first. So the inside seam of the foundations was basted and then sewn in. And then one leg is turned inside out, shoved inside the other. And the crotch seam is pinned, basted, and then finally sewn, at least up to the fly. It's a very exciting stage because once that seam was done, I could finally start to see the shape of the hose. Hello friends, so we have reached the point where the waistband can go on, which is very exciting after, God, I didn't even know, like 6 months at this stage probably. So the first, I've already got one side on, or one side pinned in place anyway. First thing I need to do is to undo these panes that I had pinned up to keep them out of the way so they can just flop loose. And then I just am pinning it starting from each side first because I'll need to sew up the middle and I want to make sure that is in the right place. So it's just a case of lining it up and getting it pinned in. I tacked the calico waistband to the fashion fabric already to reinforce it like all of the other pieces. So now that I've got these two ends, I need to pin those together in the right place over the seam of the back of the crotch so that I can get them lined up perfectly, which shouldn't be too hard. Once they were lined up, I joined the two waistbands with a back stitch, which ended up being one of the neatest little bits of sewing on the whole thing, but was promptly hidden under felling.
and then the waistband was basted into place and stitched down.
Okay, so this is where we're up to on the trunk hose. The waistband is now in. I've done one side of the panes so that I could practice before I showed you guys what I'm doing. I did stop a couple of days ago to have a look at the instructions because, you know, I'm getting to the last stage and I just wanted to double check how the lining goes in. So the lining is done. It's been done for a while because I needed to double check a couple of things, basically sizing. I wanted to double check it was still actually going to fit me because pandemic, etc, etc. Anyway, so I was under the assumption, oh, it's a lining, it's going to be bagged out or I'll have to whip stitch it in. I should just double check. I double checked. It's not. It's tacked in place and then a ribbon or a binding goes over the top and hides the raw edges, which is not what I expected. Even though I've read it several times, I just hadn't acknowledged that bit. So I went back and had a look at some extant garments online and in Patterns of Fashion. Part of the waistband has disintegrated, so whole conjectured shape is given from the pieces remaining. It is of crimson velvet, bound on the top with a straight strip of crimson satin, 5mm finished width, which continues down the centre front opening. So that is what we're doing, essentially, and that is on most of the hose in here. Like I said, I probably can't find another example now, but it is on most of them. So yeah, that is what they did at the period, so that is what I need to do. So I've gone online and I brought myself some silk ribbon, which was kind of dumb in retrospect, because before that this whole thing was suitable to go in the water, and with the silk ribbon it won't be. So maybe somewhere along the lines I'll have to switch it out or take it off to wash them or something, because since I can wash the rest of it, it kind of makes sense. But this is what I went for anyway, and this is what I'm going to put on for now anyway, at least for the first couple of wears. That is for the waistband, the bottom of the legs, and around the opening on the crotch. Also, while I was flicking around, the issue that I had earlier with the seams, I cannot for the life of me remember which one it is, but I was reading one of these, and on one of these it says that they finished the seams with wax, which makes perfect sense. It's essentially Elizabethan seam finish, seam stop, whatever it's called, that stuff. If I hadn't gone back and checked now, then I wouldn't have found it. And it's too late to use it now because the only seam that I had left that was accessible was the waistband, and I just don't want any more bulk on there than there already is. But, like, that's definitely something to try for next time. I'm really excited that I found it. And yeah, even though it's too late for this time, this just shows the importance of just continuous research, because every time you read, you find something new. But anyway, I am going to show you guys how I'm doing the panes next. So these are the panes, and they are meant to be cartridge pleated. They are not properly cartridge pleated. Because I was lazy when I was patterning this out or adjusting the pattern, I didn't bother to adjust the panes, and I knew this was going to be an issue when I started. I just didn't realise how much it was going to bug me, because obviously cartridge pleating adds a lot of structure to the thing, and these don't really add it. On the one hand, it's on the waist, which I don't really need the structure from. On the other hand, you know, historical accuracy and all of that. The one advantage is that normally with cartridge pleats, they would be butted up against the waistband. On these ones, that isn't the case. They are meant to lie flat, so they don't actually give as much structure as normal cartridge pleats. Basically, I'm just doing as much as I can to get them even and get them in. They're not brilliant. I'm not that pleased with them, but that's what I can do without having to start again from the beginning. So yes, what I'm doing is I'm pulling them up as if I was going to cartridge pleat them. I'm leaving the ends where the trim is flat, because that seems to be the most reasonable place. I've measured it out, and these need to cut, basically each one gathers down to about 7 centimeters, which gives me about 3 good sized tucks, and then just hand sewing those in. This is one of the things that even if you were sewing mostly by machine, you would still have to do by hand, because it is an after thing. You wouldn't want to go through all of that fabric with a machine anyway, probably. So no big deal. Normally it would be a lot more bulky along here, but it's not going to be. But let me show you how they're done.
With that said, I began the process of pleating the panes. Once I'd got them all in and even, I sewed them into place with little straight stitches, going in through all layers to hold them into place, and then afterwards pulled out the gathering stitches. What's next? Find out after this brief ad break. With most of the main sewing done, the next step on the pattern is to prepare the lining. I sewed the legs together in the same method as the main piece. The outside seams were basted and then sewn together, and then the inside seam. Because it's just a single layer of cotton, I could press and fell these seams as well, and get them nicely neat, which was incredibly satisfying after so many seams that I couldn't finish, as I'd normally be able to. Once both legs were finished, one was turned inside out and slipped inside the other to sew the crotch seam, and that was felled too. There's no waistband to add to the lining, as it's cut in one piece by adding the height to the top of the pattern piece when you cut it. I put the lining inside the main trunk hose and basted them together around the waistband, the crotch opening, and the legs. And then I stopped, and stared out the window for 6 months. Part of it was indecision about using the silk ribbon, part of it was 2020 and all that happened, and part of it was just my exhaustion with the project. I sewed the lining in on the 15th of July and didn't manage to pick up the camera again until the 9th of January 2021.
So it is now, God, I don't even know, 6 months later at least. Actually, no, that's probably not true. I haven't worked on it seriously since August. 2020 happened, and it's now 2021. Only the beginning, to be fair. So off camera, I have managed to sew in the edge, hem, whatever you want to call it, I can't even think of the name right now, around the waistline. So the waist is all finished, the waistband is completely finished. It's got all these eyelets in so that I can tie it onto my shirt and close the crotch as well. Obviously I need to change what I'm using, but for now these work perfectly fine. The reason, or part of the reason, aside from depression, that I haven't done anything for ages is because I got caught up in stressing about cutting off the extra length off the legs. So today I am holding myself accountable, which is why I finally got the camera out again, and I am going to cut these off. They have got the extra in already so that I can sew the ribbon on to finish them. I'm not going to do it as it should do, which is how it should be on the waistband, where it comes over and kind of clips the edge, basically like bias binding. I'm going to do it the modern way, which is to hide it underneath, and that's because I don't have exactly matching, and at this point I'm done. I need to finish this, so I am going to do it with what I've got, and I'm going to tuck it behind. I could obviously do it with more of the velvet, but that would be so thick, and I do not want to go through, I mean here,
that's going to be 4 layers of velvet where the velvet joins up on the bias binding as well, plus the lining. I'm not doing that. Even though I've done thicker along this line, I'm not doing it. I did buy silk ribbon as well, but I decided not to use it because everything else so far, this is not done with historically accurate fibres. It's all natural fibres, or at least mostly natural, as close as I can get to natural fibres, but I haven't been able to do it in original fibres. It's mostly cotton. The advantage of that is that it can go in the wash. If I do this with silk ribbon, it can no longer go in the wash. So I'm just doing it with a bit of fabric. I've already prepared it with bias binding. You can see the bias binding tutorial I made a little while ago if you're not sure how to do that. And yeah, once I finish these off, I just need to put the Modesty panel in the crotch. You can't really see anything because of the blue, and because the light's going, because I've been trying to get these even. Well, you can't really see, but I do kind of need a Modesty panel in there. It's not actually as bad as it could be, especially since I have decided I'm going to make a quad piece at least for some things. So, yeah. So, the last steps on this, and then they will finally be done. Cut these off, put the bias binding on the edges, and then that Modesty panel, and then the trunk hose and the hose for Aziraphale are finished. Then I'm going to take a break and do another project, and then I'm going to come back and do the top, because 2020 took a load out of me. If you see my 2020 year in review video, you'll know what's happened, but I want this finished, so I can move on, start fresh, and then come back fresh for the top. So yeah, that's the plan. We're going to cut off these and then get sewing.
This is not the recommended way to cut off excess, but I didn't have the willpower for best practice at this stage, as you might be able to tell. But it was just a case of basting the lining back down and then sewing on the binding. If you're not sure about the methods I was using for the bindings, have a look at the sewing dictionary. I've got a couple of videos there on bias binding which will give you some pointers. I don't have footage of it, but the fly was made simply by binding a piece of the fashion fabric and the lining together.
Okay, so I am almost there. The hems of the canyons are now bound. They're not actually bound, I did them as bias binding like I said, because you can see there's a slight difference between those two, and I just didn't want that on the outside. It should have been done like this, where it went around the edge, but because it's so visible there, I didn't. So the last thing that I need to do is, well, you can see where the crotch is because of what I'm using to hold it closed at the moment. That's my fly flap, and I just need to stitch that in. And then, after like a whole year, I am done. So I'm going to use the last light to stitch that in, and then I will be done. Hallelujah. It only took semi-functional brain chemistry and the fret of a move to get this done, but I got there.
And here they are, finally finished and ready to wear. I do love how ridiculous trunk hose are from a modern standpoint, but Mrs. Dolthalion keeps telling me that they're actually kind of flattering on my figure, which I'm not sure if it's a low-key read or a genuine compliment. Either way, I do love them. It feels like I'm wearing a pair of cushions. I do desperately need to get the doublet done so I can tie them into place and they stop falling down though. And that really is it, after a full year of promising that this would happen. I'm going to do a full review both of the pattern and of my process, so stay tuned for that in 2 weeks. Despite all of the struggles, I'm really proud of how they came out, and I learned a lot during the process as well. Going through all the footage for this video reminded me of how much I really enjoyed the project before my brain chemistry started going downhill, and now I feel ready and energized to start on the doublet again. I'm still going to stick to the break that I promised myself in the 2020 video, just because there's a couple of quick projects that I want to get done beforehand before I get into the great big slog of some more hand sewing. So stay tuned, the doublet will be coming hopefully a lot quicker than this one, but I've got a couple of exciting things to do first. I mentioned this on my last video, but having reached this milestone, I have set myself up a coffee. So if you would like to help support me make more projects like this, The link can be found in the description below. At the moment, I have no income, so anything that you are able and willing to give will help me to improve the quality of these videos, as well as help pay for the fabric to keep doing more projects like this. My question for you today is, what is the longest project that you've ever worked on? I haven't quite reached the dad level of leaving it until retirement yet, but this one certainly dragged on for a while, and there's still the doublet to go. Thank you for watching through to the end, and as always, a huge thank you to my lovely subscribers. Thank you. If you enjoyed this or found it helpful, please think about giving me a like or subscribing if you're not already for more sewing and costume related content, or donating to my Ko-fi to help support the channel. Stay safe, stay sensible, and I shall see you again soon. Bye! And this is why I don't have the sound on.